Well, hello there, my friend, and welcome again to part 2 of Connie's Coding Coconut questions number 1. In the first part, we looked at how we could prepare our source data for plotting using pandas. And now we will create our dashboards using Dash. So we will create an equipment dropdown, and we will also create a bar chart and a data table. And all this will be served on a server, and we can look at our data visualized in a web browser. So let's get to it. Now it's time to build our main dashboard. And for that, we are going to use a main file here to run our application. And then we're going to use a layout to create our layout, our HTML elements. And that will import the different components that we have. For example, the equipment dropdown, the data table, and the bar chart. So we start from the main file, load our application, import the layout, and the layout imports the components. Okay? But first, we need to install Dash and a library called Dash Bootstrap components. So let's do that first. We'll go to our terminal and write pip install dash. And I already have them installed, so that's why I get the recommend already satisfied. And then we also want to install the Dash Bootstrap components, which is the better themes for our dashboard. So it gives us a nicer look from the start. And now when we have installed these dependencies, we can go back to our main.py file and import dash. Then we can write from dash import dash. And to import our Bootstrap components, we write from dash Bootstrap components import. But we would want to import the themes here, and we want to import Bootstrap like that. And to create our main application now, we need to import HTML also. So from dash, we import HTML. Okay. And let's now define our main application. So we define the main. And first, we want to create the app. So we write app equals dash. And here we want to load our Bootstrap components. So we write external style sheets equals, and we want to put that into a list. And we use Bootstrap here. And then we want to set a title for our application. So we can write app.title equals jobs. And to run our Dash application, we are required to get a layout for it. So we write app.layout, and that will be equal to HTML dot, and we can create a div here and just give it the app.title here. So then we will create a div element which will contain the word jobs here. And the final thing we want to do is app.run to start our server. And then if this is the main file, like if underscore name or dunder is equal to dunder main, then we want to run our main function. Okay, so now when we run this code, app will be dash and a dash object loaded with the Bootstrap core components. And then we will create a simple layout with a div and run the server. So if we now press on run here, we will see the server here. And it's only this job div here. It's served on our local computer, but it only has a single div element named jobs here. But we have started our server and it's running here, and you can see that this is a development server. Do not use it in a production deployment. But everything is running, and we now have created our first dashboard. Okay, but that doesn't give us so much. So we want to create our layout file now. And for that, we are going to do a bit different here. We are not going to use the HTML anymore. And we are going instead to create a separate layout here. So we will need to import that first. So the first thing we want to do is write from layout, import create layout, and that is a function that I already have in this layout. We will inspect that in a bit. And then here we want to create the app.layout and set that equal to create layout, and here we want to pass our application. So now this will create a same layout, but we define a function for it here instead to keep our code a bit cleaner. So in the main application, we just create our application and let the layout take care of the rest for us. Okay, let's take a look at the layout file now. All right, here we have our layout file. So we create a layout here, and we pass the dash app to it. And when we pass the dash app, we can get the components of the dash app, for example, the title for our layout. And the first thing we need to do is import HTML from dash so that we can create our div element. So let's do that. HTML.div. And here we want to return the div component to our dash app. So we'll return html.div. And in the div, we want to have all our components. So we want to have the equipment dropdown, the data table, and the bar chart. But first, we want to give this a class name. And let's say that this is app-div. And then we want some children. And those we can name as a list here of children. So we'll pass that down here. And the first children we want is the html.h1, which is a header. And then we can give that header the title, which is the app.title. And the title we want to apply a style to. So we want the style to be equal to a dictionary containing our formatting settings. So let's see what we get here. We have text align, and that is if we want to align the text to the left, center, or the right. But we want to align it to the center. So we'll put center here. And then let's put a html.hr here to break up our header. And let's now see what we have here. We have a class name for our first div, and we have a header here, and then we have a break. Let's put a comma here as well. And now we can try to run this code. Let's put that away here as well so that we have a closed. So let's run this code. And let's put the terminal over here. Close that one. And I need to run it from the main app file here. So let's run it again. Yes, we have the server running. We'll open our panel. Oh, we got a type error here. Object of type set is not JSON serializable. So let's look inside our layout here. Of course, this is a dictionary, so we shouldn't put the colon here. We should put that here instead. Okay, so let's try to save this and run this again. And let's see if we go to here and refresh. Yeah. Now we have the jobs title here. It is centered in the middle because of this text align that we set here in the layout to be center. And then we added this HR element, and that puts a nice divider here. So now it's time to create the equipment dropdown. And for that, we need to create a new component. So we create a new py file named the equipment dropdown. We go to that, and we don't have much in it now. But here we want to create this dropdown. So first, we can do from dash import, and here we want the dash core components and also the HTML. And how do we then render the equipment dropdown? Well, first, let's do as before. We return an html.div, and we want to specify first that it has children, and those we pass as a list. So this is same as before, and we want first a html.h6 header, which contains the equipment name. And then we want to pass the dropdown, which is the dash core components dot dropdown. And in the dropdown, we want to give it an ID so that we can identify it later. Equipment dropdown. And what do we want to fill it with? So we can specify here the options that we have available. And that is a list of the options. And for now, we just use car 1 and car 2 and car 3. And then we want to pre-select a value. And that value will be car 1. And we also want to give this a multiple value selection. So we'll set multi equal to true. So here are the options. Here is the current value. And is it available to select multiple options? Yes. So we can save this. And if we now go and run our code, it runs. And then we can go to our panel and update the page. And now we see that we have here jobs, equipment, and a car 1. But we can also select car 2 and car 3. Okay, so we have a working equipment dropdown. But of course, that doesn't contain all that we want. So we need a bit more information here. We, for example, want a button that we can select all values from. So let's add that button. So then we need HTML.button. And we want to give it children. And those should be equal to select all, so that we can get the text of the button. And then we also want an ID for this button, and that should be equal to select all button. Okay, so let's see what we get here. Let's put a comma there so that we can close the brackets here. Go back to the site, refresh. And now we have a select all button here, but we cannot do anything with it. We can click it, but nothing happens. So let's now implement that we can select all with this button. So close the server. And to select all, we first need to get our values. And for that, we need our data frame. So we need our data frame passed here. And we can pass our data frame here in our layout. So let's here create our data frame. And this should be equal to create df that we did before in our job data. And it should be named create df. But of course, we need to import it. So let's import create df. And from where do we want to import it? Well, from job data, import create df. And we also want to import get worker names, create summary df, and create datatable df. So all these we will need. So let's see here what this summary df does. It gets the worker names, and then it returns a data frame grouped by the equipment, and then sums it to the worker names. And this create datatable df does the same, but adds the ship type here. So let's go back to our layout, and now we create the data frame, and then we can create our bar chart data frame, and that should be equal to create summary data frame, and we pass our data frame here, and then we need the worker names. So we name these worker names, and that is equal to get worker names from the df here, and then we need our data table data frame, and that should be equal to create datatable df, and we pass here the data frame and the worker names. Okay, so now we have our data frame here that we pass to our equipment dropdown, and now we can fill our dropdown first with all the values. And how do we do that then? Well, we can get the all equipment variable and set that to our data frame equipment column and get the unique values. So this will filter all the equipment for us and put that into this all equipment variable. And now we have to fill our options here. So we need to create a list comprehension and do a, here put a dictionary containing the key values. And there we want to put the label, and that should have the equipment, and then we should have the value, and that should also be the equipment, and that we need in the list comprehension then. So for equipment in all equipment. Okay, so what do we do here? We put the label to be the equipment name and also the value to be the equipment name for equipment in all equipment. And all equipment is equal to all unique values in the equipment column. Okay. And now we don't want to select just the car 1. We want the value to be all equipment values. All right. So let's save this and go to our main file and run the code. And let's see now what we get if we refresh this page. Now we have all this equipment here. It's filled already for us. And we can deselect it like this. But still, the select all button doesn't work. But at least we have all these values here. So now we can fill it with all the unique values. But let's now see how we can add a select button here that works, or we have added the select button, but we need to fill the values from it when we click it. So then we first need to import from dash.dependencies. We need to import input and output. So input and output, this gets the input values from something, and then the output outputs the values to our Dash application. And then we need here to do the app callback, it is called. So we do that here. We specify the app.callback. And here we specify our input. And what is the input? Well, that is the select all button down here. So we can copy that. And what should we then listen for the input? Well, we should listen for the number of clicks. So in the app callback decorator here, we get the input from the select all button. And when we click that, that is the input. Then we start this callback. And then we need to define a output. So what should we control when we click the button? Well, that is the equipment dropdown. And what should we control of it? We should control the value or set the value of it. Okay. And now we see that we have this decorator here, but we don't have any function. So we need to create a function here. And we can give that function any name, but let's say that we want to name it select all equipment. And here it is important to pass it a parameter, but we can just leave it as a blank underscore here. And we want to return the all equipment. Okay, this looks a bit strange, but it's not, because what we do here is that we apply this callback decorator to our function here, and that returns all equipment. But how does it do that? Well, first we listen to the input, which is the select all button. And when that is clicked, we then give the output to the equipment dropdown, the value, and that value is all equipment. So we pass the value all equipment to the equipment dropdown when we click the button. Okay, let's try to save this and run this code. And let's see what we get here. We reload this page and see that now we can select or deselect everything. And we can also press the select all, and that will select all the equipment for us. Okay, so that works really nice. The next thing we want to look at is our bar chart. All right, so first we'll do our imports. So we'll need here to import pandas as PD, because we will do some DataTable manipulation, and we'll also need the dash core components. So from dash import dash core components, and since we are returning a div, we need the HTML. And also we want the input and output, since we want to update the bar chart. So we'll write from dash dot dependencies import the input and the output. And to draw our chart, we need to import plotly.express as px. And the first thing we want to do is to create our long format data frame. So I'll write here long format data frame to be equal to pandas.melt. But first, let's look at why we need to create this long format data frame with the pandas.melt. So let's go back to our job data here, and we are working with the summary data frame that we want to pass to our bar chart. And if you remember from the part 1 video, we did the group by the equipment, and we set the sum for each worker names as the columns. So we can run this code and print the summary data frame. And if we run it now, we will see here that we get the equipment and the worker names here as columns and how many times they have worked on each equipment. But to display this information in a bar chart, we only want columns, equipment, and the number of times worked. But this is hard to explain, so let's look at an example. We'll go back to our job data here, and we'll comment out this one for the moment, and then we'll create a new long format data frame here and set that equal to pandas.melt. And the melt function then takes the summary data frame, and then we want the ID variables to be equal to the data frame's equipment, and value variables, the value vars, should be equal to the worker names, and the variable name should be name, and then the value name should be equal to number of times worked. All right, so we'll print long format data frame, and now we see that we get the equipment column here and the name of the worker as a separate column and the total number of times worked for the worker. So here's the car 1, here is the name of the worker, and it lists each equipment that they have worked on and the total number of times worked on this. So we transformed a wide data frame to a long data frame, and we need this to represent this data in our bar chart easier. So now we can group on each worker name here easily. So let's go back to the melt that we have here and check what we did again. So we passed the summary data frame to the function. Let's do like this, by the way, so we can read it easier. So we passed the summary data frame. We wanted the ID variables to be the equipment column. So the equipment column here. And then we wanted the value variables to be the worker names. And remember that that was the unique names we had of each worker. So up here, if we scroll to this, we had the unique names as columns, but then we transformed them to rows instead. And we also had the variable name to be set to name. So then the name here was the name of the unique names we had of the workers. So that we get from here the name. And then the value names is the number of times worked. All right, we'll print or comment this out for now, since we don't want to print out these values. And we'll also go and comment out this one that we left in the part 1, so that we don't want to print out the head of the create data frame function that we created. All right. By the way, we can copy this code and go to our bar chart and replace this long format with this code. We'll uncomment it. So now we can create our bar chart. So let's do that. We write figure equal to a px.bar. And here we want our long format data frame. And we want the x-axis to be equal to equipment and the y-axis to be equal to number of times worked. And we want to have the, let's put these here a bit down so it's easier to read. And we want to have the color grouped by the name column. And we want to set the bar mode to group so that the bars will be grouped according to the equipment. And then we also want to set a title and a font size for this figure. So we can do fig.update layout. And the update layout takes dictionaries with the values and keys that we want to modify. And here we want to modify first the title. So we'll input title equals a dictionary with the text equal to comparison of the number of times worked per equipment, the font to be equal to a dict, and pass the size equal 18. So let's do like that. Okay. And the final thing we need to do is to return our figure. So we'll return a html.div. And now we want to render the bar chart with the dcc.graph. And the figure is our figure. So we write figure equals fig. And the ID will be bar chart. Let's not do underscore, but bar chart. And we also now, when we return this render, oh, we didn't have summary df here. We have our long format data frame. And we now need to call this render function here from our layout. So we go to the layout and import bar chart. And here we have our div, our children. Here is the end of the children. Here is the end of the div. So we'll put it here. And now we want to do bar chart dot render. And we pass the app. And here we also need to pass the data frame. So that is the bar chart data frame. And we also need the worker names passed here. So we'll pass the worker names. And now let's see that we have this correctly. So we have the bar chart, the worker names. And then here, oh, this shouldn't be long format. It should just be df. And then we need to add the worker names here. And let's see, app df worker names. Yes, this looks good. And the layout, the bar chart.render. So here we say render, but we return a div, just like we did here with the dropdown container, with the app bar chart df render function here. And now if we go and run our code, so let's go to the main and see if we will succeed with this one. Okay, not yet. So the render is missing one required positional argument, worker names. And let's see then, layout, render, worker names. Must be that we haven't saved this layout file. Let's go to our main and try again. Yes, now it's better. And let's check what it looks like. Yes, we have the equipment here. We have our bar chart. We have all the names of the workers. We have the equipment and the number of times worked. And let's zoom this out a bit. So we can deselect the workers here. And we can see if we can zoom. We can zoom in and get the trucks. So we have truck 1 here with only Melker Todd and Otro and so on for truck 2. So this works really nice. Click the auto scale and let's see here if we remove the equipment. That doesn't work yet because we only create this bar chart once, but we didn't make it dynamical yet. So that is something we need to add as well. So let's go back to our code and go to our bar chart again. So first, let's turn this into an inner function. Update bar chart. And let's do here, tabulate this. And we want to pass here all equipment as a variable. But we also want to get the filtered data some way. And for that, we can do a filtered data variable here because we want to update the bar chart when we add or remove equipment. And for that, we can use the pandas query method. So we'll do long format data frame dot query. And this is a lot same like writing a SQL query, equipment in at all equipment. So we search for the equipment in the variable that we pass here, the all equipment. And you may ask, okay, we just put this variable here, all equipment. What is the value of it? How do we know that we pass all equipment to it here? Well, then we need to use the input and output at the app callback. So we'll write the decorator app.callback here. And we'll give it the output. So output. And we'll also give it an input. And the output, we want to change the bar chart, which is the ID of our bar chart that we put here. And what do we want to change of it? Well, we want to change its children. And the input is the equipment drop down and the value of that. And in the end, if this is empty, if we don't have any values at all, we just want to return html.div and the ID should be equal to bar chart. Let's run this and see what it looks like. Go to our main and let's go to our bar chart. And now it should update when we click on this, but it doesn't. So we have some bug in our code still because this isn't updating, but it should be. So let's see what that could be. We'll shut down the server here. Go to our bar chart and I think I see the problem here. We have our filtered date here to be equal to date, but we want it to be of the name filtered data. But that doesn't matter so much because this is only a name. But what we should do is to pass our filtered data to our bar chart and not the long format data frame. So if we put here filtered data and save and go to the main function and run the code again, and let's update here. And now let's see what we get. Yes, now when we remove data here, we get an updated bar chart. So this works really nicely. So let's look at how we did this then. We have the callback. So we get the input, which is the all equipment from the equipment dropdown, and we output this to the bar chart's children, the values, and we get the update bar chart function here, which takes the all equipment that we get from the equipment dropdown, and we pass that to the filtered data, and then we render the bar chart from the filtered data here. Now we look at the data table. So the data table, to render that, we need to first from dash import, and what we want to return, we want to return an html.div, so we'll need HTML, and we'll also need dash table. And in our render function here, we use the app and the data frame. And what do we want to do here? Well, we want to create a table, and we want that table to be equal to a dash table dot data table, and we need to specify what data we want to pass to our table, and that will be equal to our data frame dot to dict. And what do we want to pass? Well, we want to pass all records in the table, and we also need to pass our columns. So we'll say columns equal, and we'll do a list comprehension with a dictionary here, and we'll say that the name will be a C and the ID will be C for C in columns. And we need data frame dot columns. So our data will be the data frame dot to dict, and this records here is just a keyword that we want all records in our data frame. And then we also want the columns, and we want the name and the ID for each column in our data frame columns. And then we want to return this table. So we'll return html.div, and we'll return html.h6 for a header first. This will be our title. So we'll say number of times worked per equipment. And let's also center this using the style. So we'll set a dictionary here and write text align and give it the value of center. And we also want to add our data table. So let's do here children equal a list, and let's do like this and close the list. And do here, we want to return html.div, and what we want to return, the table and the ID of table. So we are returning first a header for our table aligned to the center, and then we are returning the table itself to our layout. And in the layout, we need to also import our data table. And here we need to render it. So we'll add a comma and we'll do datatable.render. And we need to pass the app to it and also our data table data frame here. Okay. And let's save our layout, save our data table, and let's try to run this code and see what we get. And it's running, so let's go to our server. And if we look down here, we have the number of times worked per equipment. But this equipment here is not the title of the data table. That is the title of the x-axis for our bar chart. But we have the title for our data table, and our data table, it shows the equipment, the ship type, and the worker names, and how many times they have worked per equipment. So this is the table we want, but we want to add some formatting here to it as well, because it's not easily distinguishable that this equipment belongs to the bar chart now. So we'll just go back to our layout and let's add here, we'll shut down the server and we'll add after here, we'll add break. So we'll write html.br and then we'll also add a divider. So we'll add html.hr and now this should add a break and a divider for us, and then it should render the data table. So if we now go and run the code again, we should now see here, yes, that we get the equipment here, a break, and then the divider, and then the data table. So now it works as we want. So let's see what we have built here. We have the equipment drop-down here containing all the equipment. We can deselect and select equipment, and the chart will auto-update. We can zoom in to our chart. We can remove worker names from it, and we can restore it here with the auto scale, and we can download a plot as PNG, and we also have the data table with details if you want to check the ship type, if it's an ARG or a CRO, and how many times each person or team has worked on the equipment. All right, my friend, that's it for this video. If you have any comments, drop them below. Or if you have any questions, please also drop them below. Did you like it? Did you not like it? What's your thoughts? And if you want to be featured on the next Coding Coconut question video, please send me an email at codingquestions@connysöderholm.com and I will for sure solve your problem. And please don't forget, like and subscribe if you like it, for more content like this. Have a very, very, very nice day and see you later.